The Philadelphia Experiment was released in theaters in 1984. The film follows two men who have been pushed forward in time to 1984 when a scientific experiment aboard the USS Eldridge goes horribly wrong. The movie's based on what some would call an urban legend, some would call it a conspiracy theory, and some would say it's based on a true story. What do you think? In 1988, a 57-year-old man watched the film and couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he'd seen it before. Al Bielek knew he'd seen the movie somewhere but couldn't pinpoint exactly where, and then it finally came to him. Bielek, who was still undergoing various New Age therapies, was able to recover repressed memories of working on the Montauk Project in the 1970s and 1980s. He also realized that his memories had been repressed to keep the project secret. Bielek, whose real name was Edward Cameron, was on board the USS Eldridge during the Philadelphia Experiment. To hear more about the Philadelphia Experiment, I'll put a link in the top corner to the video I did on it so you can check it out. Bielek and his brother Duncan Cameron, who were in their 20s when it happened, jumped off the vessel and landed at Montauk on August 12, 1983. The story of the Montauk Project is complex and elaborate. In fact, the Montauk Project supposedly kidnapped, tortured, and even murdered innocent kids and teens for the experiments done there. Yes, just like the Stranger Things series. This is where the creators actually got their inspiration. And in the initial stages of the series, it was supposed to be titled Montauk. The Montauk Project was a continuation of the Philadelphia Experiment, a rumored military experiment that allegedly occurred in 1943 and involved the use of advanced technology to make a Navy ship and its crew invisible. The Philadelphia Experiment attempted and nearly succeeded in making ships invisible to the enemy eyes, just not in the way they originally intended to. Along with making the USS Eldridge invisible, it created a wormhole causing an entire battleship to be sucked in. But what happened to that ship? From 1943 it apparently entered the 1980s. That's when the other experiment called the Montauk Project came to life. This experiment was revealed to the world in the early 1990s by the author Preston Nichols in his book titled The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time. Similarly to Al Bielek, Preston had uncovered repressed memories about his role in the project. Between 1971 and 1983, people were used as test subjects in a secret government experiment. The main goal of the project was to control the minds of the population. In 1984, Preston met Duncan Cameron. Duncan revealed further details regarding the Montauk Air Force Base. He gave an explanation of each of the many structures there. He was quite knowledgeable about numerous small matters, including the location of the mess hall's bulletin board. He had undoubtedly been there before. It appears that Duncan took part in the Philadelphia Experiment. He claimed to have served on board the USS Eldridge along with his brother Edward Cameron, or Al Bielek. Duncan also blatantly revealed that he'd been programmed to visit Preston's house, make friends with him, and then murder him so that all of Preston's efforts uncovering the secret project would be destroyed. Duncan, however, vowed to no longer support those who brainwashed him, and he's since collaborated with Preston. This collaboration with Duncan opened up Preston's memory of the Montauk Project, and even though there's still some pieces missing from Preston's memory, his workplace was a good place to start. He happened to work for a prominent Long Island defense contractor. He referred to his employer as BJM, a pseudonym in his book. While working there, he underwent some strange experiences. There was a time that a band-aid appeared on his hand, but he couldn't remember putting it there. He even asked the company nurse about it, and the nurse said he must have gotten it from the first aid kit and not from the nurse. One day he had an intuitive rage. He moved through a complex of tunnels as though he knew where he was going. For security purposes, one must present their badge to the guard as one passes from one secure area to another in order to receive a new badge with a different designation. After that, you are free to move around in the secure area. Preston just entered and presented his badge from the lower security zone, and to his surprise, the security personnel presented Preston with another badge bearing his name. He came through an office door and opened it. Preston eventually found himself in a classy mahogany paneled office. This was a desk inside with his nameplate on it that said Preston B. Nichols, Assistant Project Director. This is when everything came back to him. He came to understand that he had been leading a dual life. He has been living in two worlds at once, one as an engineer at BJM and the other as Project Director for the Montauk Project, an insane research experiment. Early in June 1990, all of Preston's significant memories had returned. Allegedly, the history of the Philadelphia Experiment was the main reason the Montauk Project was created. He claims that the Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island was interested in the story of teleportation and time travel that started with the Philadelphia Experiment. According to Preston, the Brookhaven scientists recognized that they'd made a spectacular finding by 1967. The man who'd been on board the ship used in the Philadelphia Experiment was susceptible to mind control. This man was Duncan Cameron. The Brookhaven researchers allegedly carried out experiments at the Montauk Air Force Base in complete secrecy in in an effort to harness this ability. The base already had the tools these researchers required, particularly its distinctive radar system called the SAGE radar. The SAGE radar at Montauk was originally part of the early warning defense system used during the 1950s and 1960s. It was strong enough at 425 to 450 megahertz to transmit on a frequency that opened the portal and controlled people's minds. However, project funding was denied by Congress and the money came courtesy of Nazi Germany. In 1944, funding supposedly came from a cache of $10 billion in Nazi gold recovered from a train found by US soldiers in a train tunnel in France. It served to sustain the finances until the money ran out, and after the $10 billion had been spent, the infamous Krupp family is said to have provided funding for the project. The German weapons industries for World Wars I and II were owned by the Krupp family. In the trial that took place between August 16, 1947 and July 31, 1948, the head of the Krupp family was granted freedom after a brief prison term. He was permitted to carry on his infamous arms operation after being convicted of war crimes in collaboration with Hitler at the Nuremberg trials. In any case, it's said that the Montauk Project was given the necessary funding, and Preston started working there in 1973, 2 years after he joined BGM. A mix of soldiers, government employees, and staff were provided by a diverse organisation. Many Air Force technicians from the 1960s have experience with the SAGE radar, and despite the fact that Montauk was a derelict abandoned base, the Air Force had deployed them there. Duncan Cameron was an important figure in the project. In the microwave oven experiment, a reflector was tilted down and spun due west to focus on one of the buildings at a location they believed to be secure. They had a chair inside a shielded area in that building and someone would sit there. This was usually Duncan Cameron. The researchers were interested in learning how to modify and train brainwaves. To do this, the pulse's amplitude and repetition rates were adjusted in accordance with various biological processes. A person's thoughts could be manipulated in this way. The radio frequency power of 425 to 450 megahertz gave them a window into the human mind. Duncan's constant exposure to 100 kilowatts of radio frequency power at a distance of approximately 100 yards caused substantial brain and tissue damage. His chest and brain were roasted by the radio beams. Zones of heat or energy would appear everywhere in his body where the density changed the microwave beam's concentration. When Duncan went to the doctor in 1988, the physician saw some strange scar tissue in his lungs. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A second physician who was consulted stated that the only time he'd witnessed it in effect was when a person moved in front of a strong radar beam. Prior studies conducted in or around 1986 suggested Duncan was definitely brain dead. Duncan was only alive because of his strong psychic aptitude. As Preston said, the psychic part of his mind takes over the physical part of his mind and runs the body. His brainstem is alive, his spinal cord is alive, his body is alive, but his actual higher brain is dead. Duncan was not the only one. However, no one knows how many people were involved in the experiment. To test how far it could go, experiments were also conducted on residents of Long Island, New Jersey, upstate New York, and Connecticut. However, the majority of the testing was done on soldiers who were on leave. The monitoring of various pulse kinds took time, as did the trying of various things. They would make note of and group the various effects. All of it was pure empirical experimentation, and a sizable amount of data was gathered. The study spanned 3 to 4 years, and by accident they came across a program that allowed them to concentrate on a car and turn off all of its electrical features. In the 1950s, a mind-reading machine was developed. It was made up of a chair that someone would sit in, and coils that acted as sensors were positioned circling the chair. Additionally, there were 3 receivers, 6 channels, and a Cray 1 supercomputer that could digitally or visually represent whatever was on someone's mind. When the researchers at the Montauk Project found out about this, they were immediately interested. They wanted to transform this mind-reading device into a transmitter. This would reduce the dangers associated with experiments on humans that include time travel or invisibility. Theoretically, whoever occupied the chair would transmit an alternative world to the crew, just like in the Philadelphia experiment. The crew wouldn't become disoriented or confused when the ship vanished, since they would be in sync with an alternate reality at that point. This is the point Al Bielek came in with an important role. He was initially invited into the project to clarify the metaphysical implications of using the transmitter on people. He was picked because, in addition to his engineering experience, he also possessed psychic sensitivity and a wealth of esoteric knowledge. Al was now tasked with assisting the Cray 1 and IBM 360 computer interfaces. There was a lot of data being pushed into the Cray 1 and the data needed to be converted. For what the Cray 1 was producing, the IBM 360 acted as a translator and storage bank, and it took about a year to successfully link the computer. A psychic would be sitting down in Southampton, Long Island, and the data would be relayed in the Montauk transmitter. The thoughts were decoded by the Cray 1, and then the IBM 360 would translate and store them. When the psychic focused on anything in Southampton, the transmitter in Montauk sent a highly accurate representation of what he was thinking. By the end of 1977, the transmitter had developed a very high degree of reliability for reproducing thought forms, and Duncan made incredibly important progress. Duncan would visualize something, and the object would actually materialize in front of him. Whatever Duncan could think of would appear in front of him, but it was described by Preston as something like a ghost. Sometimes the object would remain for the duration of time the transmitter was on, and sometimes the object would fade away when the transmitter was switched off. The researchers pushed Duncan harder and harder, developing his psychic abilities to defy the laws of space and time. The first experiment was called the Seeing Eye. Duncan could focus on a person and experience their point of view as if he was seeing through their eyes. He could do this by holding a lock of the person's hair in his palm. He was able to see through anyone, anywhere in the world. The second experiment was to see if they could put thoughts in the head of another person. They would arrange for Duncan to meet someone. After the meeting, Duncan would focus on this person without the other party knowing. In 99.9% of cases, the subject would have similar ideas to Duncan's. Duncan could command someone and then make them do whatever he wanted thanks to his ability to project his mind into the mind of another individual. This is exactly what the researchers wanted. The Montauk transmitter, Duncan, the equipment, and the technology allowed researchers to upload data, commands, and programs into a target subject's brain. Duncan's thoughts would eventually become someone else's. Additionally, a person could be persuaded to act in a way that he otherwise wouldn't by using this strategy. The Montauk Project's mind control aspect officially began at this point. Up until around 1979, this type of research was explored. Various other tests followed. A few of them were fascinating. Others, though, suffered terrible outcomes. In general, they could target anything. For instance, a TV set could be engineered to malfunction. They wrecked rooms and telekinetically moved things. In one instance, Duncan focused on breaking a window. In the nearby town of Montauk, a window was actually broken as a result of the force that was produced. The biggest breakthrough in the study was made in 1980. With the help of two transmitters and a huge new antenna, Cameron was able to focus on a specific time period. Then, a wormhole-like spiral would emerge from the antenna, enabling time travel. Duncan would initially take a seat in the chair, then the transmitter would be switched on. He would have a clear and empty mind. Then he would be told to focus on a period of time, say from 1980, which was then the current time, until 1990. Immediately after this, a portal would appear in the antenna's center, and the portal allowed passage from 1980 until 1990. As long as Duncan focused on 1990 and 1980, the time door would continue to appear. Preston was told that the inside of the tunnel looked like those in sci-fi spiral renditions of a vortex. Preston's role in all this was keeping everything running with the transmitter. Although he has limited memories, as he said his memory had been wiped out and much of what he knew came from Duncan's own reports. On August 12, 1983, something big came through the portal. It was the USS Eldridge. Preston began to wonder if it was just an accident or if it had something to do with the researchers' purpose for developing time travel. But if the Montauk researchers were attempting to contact Eldridge, the attempt had to be made on this specific date. This is because the Eldridge experiment took place on August 12, 1943, and it was discovered that the Earth had 20-year biorhythms. At this point, the Duncan from 1943 and his brother Edward Cameron, or Al Bielek, could both be seen through the time vortex. The Cameron brothers were both USS Eldridge crew members with a specific purpose to be fulfilled. Apparently, on the day the USS Eldridge vanished in 1943, John von Neumann, a Hungarian mathematician who Preston believed had been working covertly on the initial Philadelphia experiment, built a portal to access the ship. Von Neumann reportedly was aware that the ship's generators, which were in charge of propelling it through hyperspace, had unexpectedly failed during the experiment. After the device stopped working, Preston believed that the Eldridge had returned to its original time and location. With von Neumann's orders, it's said that the 1943 Eldridge crew entered through a portal created by Montauk researchers. Duncan Cameron and Al Bielek flew from the portal onto the floor of Montauk. Von Neumann hurriedly assigned them their assignment. They went back to the Eldridge and switched off the generator. However, there were some questions about this. Von Neumann died in 1957 from cancer, but Preston maintains that von Neumann only faked his death, and that was why he was able to meet von Neumann and ask him questions about the portal. According to von Neumann, destroying the ship's transmitters would have caused it to return home. The explanation includes the witness effect and a phenomenon known as zero-time planetary biorhythms. It was very complex and at some point in the story, unbelievable. The mission was a success, but that's when Preston, along with 3 of his colleagues, realized they went too far with time travel. The plan to end everything everything lies with Duncan. Someone approached Duncan while he was sitting on a chair and said, "Triggering the contingency program, the time is now." Duncan let loose a monster from his subconscious at that very instant, and with the help of the transmitter materializing anything Duncan thinks of, it portrayed a monster. The monster destroyed everything in its path. There were several witnesses, but nearly no one described the same creature. Depending on who saw it, it was either 9 feet or 30 feet tall. For Preston, it was about 9 to 10 feet tall. While the monster kept the researchers distracted, Preston destroyed the base's equipment. He saved the transmitter for last, anticipating the entity to vanish in the absence of the machine's power. But even after he shut off the transmitter, power continued to flow and the monster continued to slaughter. Preston finally got an acetylene torch and severed every wire he could locate on the equipment, and the entity finally stopped moving and disappeared back into the ether. The portal closed, and that was the end of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Air Force Base was closed down following the events of August 12, 1983. There was no record of anyone being on the base by the end of that year. In May or June of 1984, soldiers were sent to the base. They allegedly received instructions to shoot anything that moved. According to Preston, they were there to get rid of anyone who might be on the base. The second crew that came after that removed sensitive secret equipment that was deemed too important to leave behind. Cement mixer trucks appeared on the base about 6 months later. These trucks were seen by a large number of people, according to Preston. Montauk's huge subsurface areas were filled with cement. This included pouring cement down elevator shafts. The gates were locked and the base was permanently abandoned. Interesting. What are your thoughts about the Montauk Project? Thank you so much for hanging out with me and watching today. My name is James and this is the restricted section. If you enjoy stories like this one, please consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss any future uploads. If there's any topics you'd like to see in the future, please let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks again and see you on the next one.